Well, if I was ready to retire, I'd go
All right, you guys ready?
What's up with
We were turning to Genesis. All right, so we're kicking off chapter 10 of Revelation. Typically every time we begin this, we start with any comments, questions that we've gone through so far, chapters 1 through 9. Just to give you a little hint, the next chapter, chapter 11, is widely considered to be the most difficult chapter of the most difficult book in the Bible. So chapter 11 is a hairy one. It's very interesting, and as a matter of fact, a lot of people think that chapter 11 is the backbone to the entire Revelation book. So if you read chapter 11, from the first verse to the last verse, that is the summary of what Revelation is all about. It's about the fact that God is protecting us, doesn't protect us from persecution or other things like that, but He is ultimately going to win. The measuring stick is defined by Him, etc., etc. We'll get into that a little bit. But the chapter 10 is important because it kind of gives us the precursor into chapter 11. It's like an interlude. Many times they talk about an interlude between the 6th trumpet and the 7th trumpet. Chapter 10 is the interlude. Chapter 11 is the beginning of the introduction to the 7th trumpet. So, like we usually do, in order to make sure that we get the most in-depth conversation and clarity around Revelation, we literally do a verse-by-verse reading, and then we have the discussions, just because you haven't been here before. So that way, if anybody has any additional comments or questions, or we need to expand on anything next time, we can do that as we go through the verses. So chapter 10, verse 1, it starts with, I saw another strong angel coming down out of heaven, clothed with a cloud, and the rainbow was upon his head, and his face was like the sun, and his feet like pillars of fire. So, anything jump out at you about something interesting about that verse?
I think the whole verse is interesting, honestly. I mean, it's very figurative language, you know.
I have the rainbow.
Okay.
That was from the flood.
Okay.
It's wrapped in a cloud. His face was like the sun and his voice.
Legs full of fire.
Well, we have reference to
all the elements of the earth.
fire.
Okay. I've never read anything about it being elements, but that's true, it is. What other symbolism, what other things have we heard about the clouds? Who was ascended into the clouds?
Well, Christ went out of the clouds.
Yep, Christ went into the clouds.
And then the prediction of the coming in the clouds. And was Elijah taken up in the clouds too?
I don't know if it specified clouds in the Elijah story. I don't think it did. So one of the things that people, because Revelation is one of those books that there's a lot of opinions, a lot of interpretations, a lot of people who study it a lot and come up with different viewpoints on it. One of them is that, one that you may have heard, is that the description of this angel is actually Jesus. Do you guys have any thoughts about why that could be or could not be true?
I would have to keep reading the rest of the chapter.
Is it the seventh angel?
No.
That wouldn't immediately make me think that. I guess if I read the rest of the chapter and looked at the context tonight,
one of the best arguments against that I've seen, and I haven't been able to convince myself that it is that nowhere else in the scripture does he ever get described as an angel. Right? Because an angel is a messenger of who? Of God. So Jesus himself, what is he also?
He's part of God.
He's part of God. He's part of the Godhead. So it would be kind of a long shot. I don't know. It could be. I don't know that either. What about the fact that this angel is described as strong? Isn't that a little bit of an interesting thing? What does that mean within the angel community? all the angels that exist. What does that mean?
I mean, to me, it might make me think maybe it was more of an archangel or something like Gabriel or Michael or something.
Well,
It doesn't
why
always
do you
describe
say
it
it's
strong.
strong? Because it says mighty angel.
Yours says mighty?
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
mighty,
It says
same thing.
Yeah.
Another mighty angel. So
Another
that's
mighty angel?
That's insinuating that the others were mighty as well.
Well,
Another mighty angel.
if you remember earlier in the Revelation, they described a couple of other angels as mighty or as strong as well. So what that suggests is that there's really hierarchy within, maybe not hierarchy, there's different status within the angel community, right? There may be some that are not as strong as others.
So these are the important angels. The important. I mean, I want to, for the revelation, to carry all the weight of the rainbow and the sun and the fire, they have to be strong. So,
Yeah.
and then you have the ones that they send like to, who was it that went to Joseph and tell, the ones that gives the visions, they don't have to be that strong, but they're given a vision.
Yeah.
This is actually carrying something and willing something.
Yeah. That's an interesting point as well. I don't know what the answer is. I mean, it's still interesting, right? It's the fact that they're strong and there's mighty angels. I never thought about that before, right? The fact that, you know, you have an Arnold Schwarzenegger angel on one side, and then you have, like, I don't know, the Taco Bell delivery boy on the other side, right? It's interesting to me, the fact that God knew enough to know that there was going to be a need to have an angel that was strong to do certain jobs and carry certain messages for him, while others didn't necessarily require that. It's very, very interesting to me. The second verse says, let me make sure I didn't miss anything. Oh, one thing that I did read a bunch about is that the other part of this is that it's a similar, the imagery of the angel itself is also very symbolic in the fact that, you know, there's strength and there's power in one thing, right? He's got legs of fire, and he's got, or feet of fire, and his face is like the sun. But on the other hand, he's clothed in a cloud, and he's got a rainbow, right? So it kind of, a lot of people talk about the symbolism between the message, the Gospels themselves being kind of bittersweet, and we're going to see more about that here in just a little bit. But it's a preparation, kind of a preparing statement that the guy, he's, not only is he bringing something that's good and peaceful and beautiful, being the clouds and the rainbows, but it's also something that has power and authority. So it's not just, you know, all rainbows and sunshine, right? Which is funny because that kind of fits perfectly in this. So that's fun. Verse number 2 talks about, and he had in his hand a little book which was open. He placed his right foot on the sea and his left on the land. On the land. What is that? If you think about it symbolically, what does that suggest? Dominion. Over what?
Over everything.
Over everything. Over who? Everyone. Over what? Everything again. Right? When he comes down and he puts his, and think about that from the imagery standpoint, right? You have this big, huge, you know, Sylvester Stallone coming floating down with the rainbow down. No, that doesn't work. Let's think of someone else. Like John Cena. John Cena comes down with a rainbow and a cloud, and he stomps his foot down on the land, stomps his foot down on the water, and the imagery of it shows like a might, right? And what is it about the book that, did anybody catch anything about the book and what it was?
Well, it says the title to the Christ has title to the Lamb. It was a little book.
Oh, so they're suggesting that it's a deed in yours.
Yes.
I don't think that that's true.
Title deed to the earth. It symbolizes Christ's right to possess the rule of the earth. And this is a plan shows.
The book does, or him standing on the ground in the ocean?
The planting of the beach.
Oh, the planting. Okay, I can kind of see that. I thought you were saying the book was the deed. Because I know. Go ahead.
Mine says scroll.
Okay, similar. Greek.
Didn't they eat? I think it says later that the scroll is eaten.
Yes.
Didn't they do that before? So this is the same scroll.
No.
In the Old Testament, didn't someone eat a scroll?
Ezekiel.
Okay.
Ezekiel ate the scroll, and I think
And it was sweet or something that made
bittersweet.
him sick?
Made his stomach sick. Yep. Same, and that's exactly in just a couple of verses. We're going to see. Matter of fact, verse number 9 in chapter 10 is going to talk about exactly that. He's going to go take the book. John's going to go take the book from the angel, and the angel is going to tell him that you need to eat this. That helps us. So, it's a really good kind of segue. So, when you stop talking about it from the descriptive standpoint, the angel is coming down and he's showing his dominion over the earth, over all the people, not just the people that are believers, but also the non-believers. So, what do you believe? Just and just takes a couple stabs at it. You don't have to be right. It's symbolic on purpose. What could the little book be that would require John to consume it so that he gets the benefit of it? Take some guesses.
The gospel?
The gospel. That's what the majority of the people believe the little book is. It doesn't necessarily need to be the whole gospel. Well, so let me back that up. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, those are the gospels, right? Are there 4 stories, or is it one story told from 4 different perspectives? Right? So the little book could be the
Real story.
the perspective, right? The truth of it with all the details, right? And it has maybe more information than what we think, and we'll see that in a second as well. But the interesting thing is exactly like we were saying, the little book. It's a lot of people actually ask the question about the scroll, right? Because in chapter 5, we were talking about the scroll that was sealed. Is it the same thing or is it not? We don't think so, and the reason for it is, how was this book delivered? How did he carry the book? Was it a secret?
This angel?
Yep. In his hands? And was it sealed up? Was it closed? No, it is open. Right? So that suggests that it was free for anybody to read. Right? It's not something like in the scrolls where you have the seals on it that have to be broken, right? Which shows ownership, and remember all the various things that we talked about when you have a stamp on it, one of the seals on it, it shows who defined it, who owned it, and that it hasn't been broken, that it hasn't been opened.
Possession.
Yeah, possession, exactly.
Chain of evidence, how about that?
That's perfect. So let's keep on moving into verse number 3 because we're going to start getting into the fun stuff. And in verse 3 it says, "And he cried out with a loud voice as when a lion roars. And when he had cried out, the 7 peals of thunder uttered their voices." Okay, so there's an important symbolism in this. Does anybody recognize what it is? A specific number? 7. What other things have we been tied to when we talk about 7s? What are the other big aspects so far within Revelation through chapter 10? Have we
7 trumpets.
7 trumpets? 7 seals? What was the first 7 things? What were the letters written to?
7 churches.
7 churches. Right? So everything's in 7. What did we say the number 7 defines? Perfect. Perfect, authority, completion, right? That it's all done. Everything that was expected has been completed as expected. So these guys are screaming out, lion roars, the sound is significant. And in verse number 4 it says, "When the 7 peals of thunder had spoken, I was about to write, and I heard a voice from heaven saying, seal up the things which the 7 peals of thunder have spoken, and do not write them." So, do you guys remember how, for example, in Job, how was God's voice described? Do you not remember? And I should have wrote it. Oh, can someone turn to Job 26:14?
Behold, there are but the outskirts of his ways, and how small a whisper do we hear of him. But the thunder of his power, who can understand?
Thunder of his power. Okay, someone turn to 37:5. Yes, ma'am.
God's voice thunders in marvelous ways. He does great things beyond our understanding.
God's voice thunders in marvelous ways. And then the last one, if someone will jump to John 12, 28 through 29.
What?
12, 28 through 29.
Father, glorify thy name. Then came there a voice from heaven saying, I have both glorified it and will glorify it again. The people therefore that stood by and heard it said that it thundered. And just an angel spoke to him.
So the interesting thing is, right, one thing that, and I don't know that this is true, this is an opinion because I can't find anything to prove it, but the way it sounds to me is when God speaks, only the person that is supposed to be receiving the message is going to hear the word. Everybody else is going to hear something majestic, natural sounding, right? Like thunder or lightning. Well, thunder, you don't hear it, yeah, whatever. But thunder, you're going to hear thunder, right? So the fact that John was able to hear this meant that whatever was being said, he was meant to hear. Now, what was the next part of that that's really, really important?
Don't write it down.
He told him, do not write it. Not just do not write it, but to seal it. To make sure that nobody knows what it is. Now, there's a whole bunch of theories about what that can mean. That can mean that there's potentially, that, like, out of that came additional judgments of God that we hadn't known about or hadn't heard about or read about. Like, you know, there was something else that was being spoken of. As a matter of fact, let me jump over to Psalms 39 real quick. Psalms 39 is called the vanity of life. I don't think we want to read the whole thing, but a lot of people say that that specific area within Revelation is tied to Psalm 39. You should read it because it's quite interesting, but it'll take a little bit of time for us to read it, and my voice will get dry. I think we'll have problems. I said Psalm 39. I meant Psalm 29. The voice of the Lord in the storm. It describes the majestic might of God's voice. It's actually quite cool. And then the last one that's the most important, is that God just doesn't want us to know what it meant, what they said. There's a lot of people that put a lot of energy into trying to figure out what did the peals of thunder say. God doesn't want us to know. So I don't think that we're going to be able to guess, or, you know, if we do guess, it's just going to be lucky, right? Because if he doesn't want us to know, then there's not going to be a loophole, right? It's not going to be like you get one of those books in the mail and you're like able to figure it out. Go ahead, Nick.
All right, he's given them kind of a prophecy that the people should not know that, because, I mean, it's like, it's telling them what the ending's going to be, I think it's supposed to be, the judgment, that he's seeing the judgment, but people can't do that because they'll either change their ways or not change their ways or do things differently, or they'll change things around. So I think he's telling John this because John has responsibilities and stuff, and will follow, but it's something that's coming.
We all know it's coming.
It's coming, but we don't know exactly how it's going to work out.
Yeah, there's a lot of people. You can also find a lot of people who believe that maybe it was an actual description of when it's going to occur, or it was a description of the actual signs that it's going to happen, and that if that would have been written down, people would have been able to prepare themselves. They would have lived a party lifestyle, and they're like, oh,
There's a change of ways.
oh, there's that sign that was talked about. We better switch this up a little
It
bit.
doesn't matter. They don't have it in their heart.
Well, that's true. That's true, but maybe the sign is what puts it in their heart, and they weren't living right. And
Yeah, but they think they have time to change it. They don't wait till the last minute, and so they don't want to commit to anything. So they're evil.
okay, so any other comments on that one? All right, verse number 5. Then the angel whom I saw standing in the sea and on the land lift up his right hand to heaven. What does that represent?
You're saying he lifted up his right hand?
Lifted up his right hand.
Or just says hand.
Really? That's an important omission. Read the Greek for us, Nancy. I'm pretty sure right hand is defined within the Greek. If that's not in there, then that's a very, very. If I'm wrong on that, I would be shocked. I thought the Greek said right hand.
This ESV says right hand, but in this King James it does not.
Wow. What do you have?
I got right hand.
And what translation do you have?
I don't know, I just grabbed this one. I have different versions. New Living Translation.
That's a very.
That's kind of odd because the right hand, I believe, symbolizes like good, proper,
Right.
correct.
Well, think about what do you do when you go into the military?
And raise your right hand,
And what are you doing?
swear an oath.
Swearing an oath. Yeah, so this is a very common thing. Like if you look at Greek context, the context for this time.
Well, it says lifting the hand signifies taking an oath.
I'm interested because if it is not right, and it's not italicized to let you know that it was added, that's a problem for our
The
translation.
Greek does say right.
It does say right, I thought it did. Yeah, so you need to write that in because that's important and the reason why it's important is the people of this day would have very well known what it meant to lift up your right hand, right? It talks about it in many, many places within the scripture that it is a very serious thing to take an oath because you are raising your hand to heaven. You're providing your word and you're basically using collateral from God to suggest that you will follow through with whatever it says. So that's a really, really important thing because the context of it is critical for the time that John is writing this, but it's also important for us because we know, like, you ever on jury duty, or you go and you're a witness, or you do all the various things that require you to do an oath. You put your hand on the Bible and you raise your right hand. That's imagery that we understand.
Well, even without it being right hand, reading that and reading the next verse, I would just come to the conclusion this is right hand.
Yeah, that's good. That's good news.
Somebody might.
Does the previous verse, do you remember in the King James, did it say when he was carrying the scroll, it was like in his left hand or anything? Because I was going to say, you can use it that way as well. I mean, that's the,
What, do you know what scripture that which verse?
like in 10, like, what is it, 2? Verse,
Yeah.
His hand and
Yeah, two.
literal
His hand,
hand.
yeah.
And it said his right foot on the earth, his left, so it's his hand.
So where did he have the book in verse 2? Let's see what it says here. It just says in his hand and both.
Yeah, it doesn't have it clarified.
What had to happen is left because he had to raise his right.
Unless it's switched it. It's a very important thing for us to figure this out.
No, it's not.
I think that was the big thing that I took out of verse 5. And then 6 is where he actually states the oath. He says, and swore by him who lives forever and ever. Everybody's him is capitalized, correct?
Yeah.
Nope.
And swore by him.
Yeah. That suggests spiritual royalty, right? So Jesus or God.
None of these are capitalized.
That's
None of
crazy.
these versions.
That's crazy to me.
I mean,
We're all getting new Bibles.
reading the context, so I understand who it's referring to.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Well,
I mean,
he's the one that liveth forever and ever.
Forever and ever, yep.
Who created heaven, so.
Who created heaven and the things in it, and the earth and the things in it, and the sea and the things in it, and there will be delayed no longer. That's the most important part of that verse, that there will be delayed no longer. Now the interesting thing about that is, in the Greek, delayed no longer is not really what that translates to. The Greek word is actual chronos. which actually means time. So there will be no more time. Is that? It does say delay?
This is the latest thing
In the Greek?
in the Greek.
Can you look up a specific word in Greek?
It is right here, the chronos.
Yeah.
It's right here.
Can you click in on it and see what it says? Yeah, everybody knows kind of the weird thing about Greek, right? So Greek can have multiple definitions within a word, and the context, the words surrounding it, help you define what the context is.
Latin's the same way too.
Yeah, Latin is very similar.
So in the King James version, that there should be time no longer.
There should be time no
And
longer.
then interlinear Greek, it delay no longer will be.
Yep. Yeah, so the premise of that is if you take the two and you compare them, like, think about the differences between they will delay no longer or that there will be no more time. Those are important differences, right? Because delay is like, okay, well,
What is delaying?
yeah, well, no, it means like, okay, well, it's finally going to happen. But the time no more is finite, right? You don't have any more time. It's over. The opportunities that have been given to you have been exhausted. So it's really critical for the people that are hearing this to understand, like at this point within the judgment, the resolution is defined. The judgment has been performed, right? Or the process to judgment is being performed. So you don't get like another week. You don't get to like, let me noodle on this a little bit more. I'm feeling kind of like, I'm feeling pressure here. And so then in verse 7 it says, but in the days of the voice of the seventh angel, when he is about to sound, then the mystery of God is finished, and he has preached to his servants the prophets, as he preached to his servants the prophets. So, mystery here. This is a word that I'm sure every one of us at some point has heard. It's impossible to understand the gospel. It's impossible to know exactly what they mean. It says so in Revelation. We don't understand what God's doing because it's all mysterious to us. Is that what this means?
No.
Did you say no?
I said no.
Why?
It's not saying that. It's saying that anything that we didn't know, we're going to know.
Precisely.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. The context of the word mystery here is not like a mystery, thriller book that we're reading. It's the things that we didn't understand, we will now understand. And so that's the key to being able to help us get past all the time stuff. We do know, like, there's a bunch of stuff that even still, there's things that we do not understand, that we just don't have the capability. It's probably for our own benefit, right? There's plenty of scriptures that define for us, there's mysteries of God's plan, mysteries of what Jesus was doing, what the issues were. But at the end of it, it says, I lost my spot. The mystery of God is finished. So, what does that mean for teaching and prophecy and the Gospels and all that kind of stuff? Finished, sir. We don't need it. It basically means
Everybody's had to have the revelation.
well, everybody's had the opportunity to learn.
Yeah, previously.
Yep.
Now it's done.
Now it's done. Everything that was going to be taught and all the gatherings and the preaching and the mission stuff is finished. It's no longer required. It is at its finality. And in verse 8 it says, then the voice which I had heard from heaven, I heard again speaking with me, and saying, go take the book which is open in the hand of the angel who stands on the sea and on the island. I'm sorry, not on the land. So this is where Lisa was talking about. This is where the funkiness starts to happen, where John actually before, right? If you think about what is John's involvement level so far in this whole thing? He's just seeing images, right? He's not involved. Now he's directly involved. This is a go take a book, and then we'll see in verse number 9. So I went to the angel telling him to give me the little book. And you know that sentence, every time I read that, it makes me kind of laugh inside. I see little John walking to this big old angel. Hey, here's the book. It just tickles me. So he goes up to the angel. He says, "Hey, dude, give me that little book." And he calls it a little book. And he said to me, "Take it and eat it. It will make your stomach bitter, but in your mouth it will be sweet as honey." So if someone will turn over to Ezekiel real quick. We're going to go take a little gander at what Lisa was talking about. Ezekiel 2 verse 10. Mom, if you get 2 verse 10. Lisa, if you don't mind, will you read Ezekiel 3 verse 3? And then Becky, you'll read Ezekiel 3:14. So we'll go Mom, Lisa, then Becky. And then Keith, go to Jeremiah 15:16.
Ezekiel 2:10. And he spread it before me, and it was written within and without, and there was written therein lamentations and mourning and woe.
Okay, so what was spread out before him? The what?
I can hear you.
Look.
The book, or it was a scroll. Okay, Lisa, what does yours say? 3 verse 3?
Fill your stomach with this, he said, and when I ate it, it tasted as sweet as honey in my mouth.
Okay, and what does it say in 3:14?
So the spirit that took me out, and it took me away, and I went in bitterness, and the heat of my spirit, the hand of the Lord was strong upon me.
So there we go, right? We have the scroll being spread out before him. The scroll is likely the law, the old law, or the directions. It's supposed to, when you consume it, it's supposed to be sweet, but at the end of it, Becky clearly says it's bitter, right? Same exact theory and concept of what John is defining here. And the people that have read this, or this is directed to, are going to know. Do you have a question? So they know, they're going to know what has been taught in Ezekiel. They're going to be very familiar with this type of conversation. What do you got for 15:16?
Your words were found, and I ate them, and your words became to me a joy, and the delight of my heart, for I am called by your name, the Lord God of hosts.
Okay, did everybody hear that? Read it one more time a little louder.
Your words were found, and I ate them, and your words became to me a joy, and the delight of my heart, for I am called by your name, O Lord God of hosts.
So the word it's again consumed, right? It's consumed. Even in today, we're supposed to consume the gospel. It's not consumption because it's necessary for fun. It's consumption because it's necessary for survival.
For life.
Right. You need it in order to live. Of course, we're talking spiritual life, but you need it. If you don't have it, you're dying. So the piece to that that's important is even back in the Old Testament when they were talking about how you're supposed to live and how you're supposed to receive the message and the words and the instructions, it's not a passive thing. It's not like, oh, okay, well, I'll read 30 minutes. No. You're supposed to be consuming it. It's supposed to be the thing that makes you feel that you can make it through the day because you have the knowledge that is necessary to look past the worldly woes that was defined within Jeremiah. So what do you believe is the bittersweet part of the message?
The end, what's going to happen to a lot of people in the end.
Judgment? Yep. And what is it? What's the bitterness of it? What is the thing that people participate in that causes us to have that judgment? Sin. So the sin is bittersweet, right? It's the bitterness of the sin that also causes it. We also know about the punishment. And the other thing that is extremely bitter to me is the fact that people, and we've seen it, we saw it in chapter 9, right? I'll read it again. The rest of mankind who were not killed by these plagues did not repent of the works of their hands so as not to worship demons and the idols of gold and silver and of brass and of stone and of wood which can neither see nor hear nor walk. And they did not repent of their murders, nor of their sorceries, nor of their immorality, nor of their thefts. This is after the scrolls have been opened. This is after the first 6 trumpets have been sounded. These people still do not recognize the errors of their ways. So they are intentionally rejecting not only the very clear signs from God, but they've been rejecting the Gospels and all the good news that they have all along. And that is extremely bitter, right? You know, when you eat something that's sweet and it tastes good, and your first part of your digestion, right? The taste is what gets you there, right? If it tastes bad when you first eat it, you're gonna spit it out. But it tastes good, right? You eat it, it's fantastic, and that's what the gospel should be. But then there's that gnawing feeling that sometimes there's people that you just cannot reach. And that is a frustrating thing. They're just not willing to understand or even open their minds to a potential other path. They're just hardened. And it talks about that a lot, that people will harden their hearts. You have something? All right, verse number 10. I took the little book out of, I think I already read that one. Oh no, I didn't. I took the little book out of the angel's hand and ate it, and in my mouth it was sweet as honey, that when I had eaten it, my stomach was made bitter. I had a little stomach ache, like eating too many, some kind of fruit. And verse 11 says, and they said to me, you must prophesy again concerning many peoples and nations and tongues and kings. Interesting thing about 11. What does it tell them? What was the entire reason for eating the book?
So you can have knowledge.
Okay, to do what?
To prophesy.
To share, to prophesy. That was the intent, right? So as we're consuming the Gospels, what is our intent?
Say it to yourself.
Not
Yeah.
necessarily
Lock it up, seal it.
Not necessarily prophesy, but to share.
Yeah, to share.
And as some people say that is, or whatever term that you use, share.
Yep, absolutely. Proclaim it, exactly. And who's going to be the audience?
Sinners.
I don't think it's just to be sinners. This is spiritually speaking. What's the last description within that sentence? Kings. Who are the kings in the spiritual sense? Who's the royalty within the spiritual kingdom? Remember, who has crowns? We just talked about it in the first few chapters. All the saints. Who are the saints?
I can't.
More Christians.
No. Everybody who's a believer is a royalty, right?
Yeah.
Remember, our kingdom is in heaven. We all get crowns. So this isn't just talking, this message is not just for all the people of the world being non-believers. This is for all the people of the world, period. This is for all the people in the world. So now, we're going to jump into, go ahead.
Well, for example, more knowledgeable people in the church, they're talking to the believers in the church,
Absolutely.
sharing your knowledge with all of us.
If you were to like, let's talk about a language like Mandarin. Let's say you spent 20 years in wherever learning Mandarin, some university, and you could speak it, and you could write it, and you could read it. But then for the next 30 years, you didn't do anything. What's going to happen? You're going to forget. You lose it. It's the same concept to this,
It's a
right?
waste of money all of studying.
Yeah.
They were living there.
Yeah, they're living there. Yeah. Go ahead.
I was thinking, could it also be to the enemy saying, look out?
Oh, yeah.
It's coming.
Absolutely. Chapter 11, you're going to love chapter 11. Chapter 11 is a punch in the face. Chapter 11, it's a beautiful thing for Christians, but for the non-believers, it is man. Of course, a non-believer, the thing, going back to the bitter part, right? A non-believer is a non-believer for a reason, and they're blinding themselves of the obvious, right? So the issue is we are like, dude, like, there's horses with lions' heads for crying out loud.
Price
They're like,
fire.
give me a rope, I'll wrangle them. right? Instead of just being like reducing the pride and eliminating the ego and going like, okay, let me see what this is about. Like, you don't have to be a genius to understand that things are about to get really, really bad. And chapter 11, like I said, we're only going to go through like maybe the first 12, 13 verses, maybe 11 verses of chapter 11, because after that it gets crazy. The first part of the chapter is good enough to make you like go like, whoa, but the last part is really crazy. So like I said, chapter 11, commonly defined as the most difficult book within the most difficult, the most difficult chapter within the most difficult book of the entire Bible. Chapter 11 is very, very difficult, but on the other hand, it is also considered to be like, it should be the conclusion of the book versus right in the middle of it, because it summarizes everything that's necessary to understand within one chapter. Now, obviously, there's context that you need elsewhere, but the overall theme of chapter 11 is really, really important. So, in verse number 1 of chapter 11, it says, "And then there was given me a measuring rod like a staff, and someone said, 'Get up and measure the temple of God and the altar and those who worship it.'" Okay, so there's a couple pieces of this information already. Just taking it for the highest level, what do you believe is the point of this particular verse?
How true are the believers' beliefs?
Okay.
Baseline of judgment, to begin judgment.
All right, that's a great summary. Now, how is he going to measure that? With a staff. Where is the staff from?
Moses?
He just says that he was given a measuring rod like a staff.
Okay, but who gave it to him?
I mean, I'm assuming an angel.
An angel. Okay, so it's something from heaven.
Yeah.
So this goes directly into the question of, okay, I think I'm a pretty good person. I'm a pretty good person. I'm going to be just fine. The question is, when you get this rod sitting up next to you, and it looks at you and it weighs you compared to what? What is the likely measuring? What's the bar? Jesus. And what? His teachings. Right? It's not something we don't understand. It's not something we do not have access to. Right? That's the important piece of this, is that we already know what we're going to be measured against. Now, if we decide to chunk out a piece of what is going to be the baseline for the measurement, if we decide to take out like, I don't really like Acts, I'm going to take that out. So, do you get to take that chunk out of the rod?
Well, but
You
you
can.
guys consider too that we might be measured against the staff, which maybe is Jesus. None of us are ever going to. We're all going to fall short.
Okay, so what is it that gets us to the measuring stick though?
It's grace.
Okay, which is based on the what? What do we need to do to receive
Well, we
the
have
grace?
to obey and live as
Obey.
a Christian.
Okay,
You need to be baptized and strive every day.
yeah, practice perfection, even though you can never get to it. Right? So it doesn't say that you have to live a perfect life. It says you have to meet to the staff. You have to meet the bar of which Jesus has defined. So if you take out aspects of what the gospel says are necessary to receive the grace.
Okay, here's another question. Is the bar on the staff going to be the same for all, or is there extenuating circumstances?
Answer that question.
I would say yes.
Okay, well, what does yes answer to?
Yes, there are extenuating circumstances. And what about people with mental illness and
Children that die, young.
well, children?
What's the difference between a child that dies and a person who
Well,
does not have
you
the
know-
awareness? A mentally ill person.
Well, they could be mean and people.
Well, yeah, but if they don't know what they're doing, like we're not talking about people who have a mental breakdown and go off the handle and make a bad decision, and then afterwards they're like, oh, I don't know what I did. No.
Born like that.
People, yeah.
We always talk about the age of accountability. I think the same concept applies.
Accountability is critical, right? So if you can't be held accountable because you don't know what actions you're taking, I don't know that the bar is the bar is the same, right? You have to be able to drop below it in order to be held accountable for your actions, right? If you cannot understand, okay, what does it mean to believe? If you can't understand that, then how could you ever be baptized? Right? And that's the problem with having children and babies and various, other demographics within society. That's the problem with having this general concept of everybody should be baptized. It's an inward or it's an outward expression of something inward. No, that doesn't work. Because you have to be able to vocalize and you have to be able to state the reasoning behind it.
You have to know what you're doing.
You have to know what you're doing. Exactly. That's the critical. Is that extenuating circumstances? I don't think that's extenuating circumstances. The line's drawn. Because we are accountable, we drop below it because we make bad choices. You can't drop below it if you don't know what choices you're making.
Also, like in children, they have to know what they're going to have to give up. And that young, they don't know all the temptations in life.
The consequences.
You have to understand the consequences of sin.
Does anybody, I don't know that that's 100% the right answer. Does anybody have a different opinion? This is perfect conversation.
Well, this is going to veer off as we always do. But, my perception of my own personal perception of suicide, for example, had always been, oh my goodness, suicide, you're done. You're toast. You kill yourself and you're toast.
Okay.
But as I've gotten older in the last few years, I think people that do that obviously are mentally ill. Because you wouldn't do that if you weren't mentally ill.
Hold on, do what?
Kill yourself.
Oh, kill yourself?
Yeah.
I don't know, you can endure a lot of pain until you think you can't endure anymore.
I'm interested in this. I'm going to keep my opinion to myself. I want to hear what
No,
where everybody else goes.
I'm saying if somebody does that, there is something very wrong mentally. So are they still going to be accountable for that? Keep his opinion to himself.
I'm waiting.
Well, I've been thinking about that
The church
the
stands.
last couple of years, thinking about that.
You have people that that are dying of cancer, they want to die, and they want somebody to kill them, but nobody wants to do it, and they don't think it's a sin.
Well, okay, not every case would be like that. Let's take, for example, that guy that died in New York, that was the CEO of Bed Bath & Beyond, just jumped out of an 18-story window because he felt so threatened by all the bad things he had done. He knew he didn't want to face the music. Well, that's what I think. I mean, I don't know what his mind was, but he killed himself because of the decisions he made. Same like when the crash, the great crash happened, and all those men lost everything, and they just jumped out of windows and killed themselves instead of facing the music and taking care of their families. So, in that instance, I guess you're not exactly mentally ill. I don't know.
You just don't want to be punished for it, or everybody say, "Oh, you did it. It's your fault."
No, I worry about those people.
So if Job would have killed himself when he was being tormented. He was going through things we can't even imagine. Would he have been excused to kill himself? How about Judas? He killed himself. So is there a chance he's in heaven? Why?
Because he didn't
Well,
repent.
in a way, he repented because he what he did, his actions, what he did, what he caused, if he saw it, he killed himself. because that's what happened. Oh, no.
The guilt.
They tried to give the money back. They wouldn't take it, so he goes out and kills himself.
You raise a very interesting question. Dealing with PTSD with our folks who have been on the front line, who have killed, and have to live with that and tormented with that. And it should take a different perspective. God knows where they are. Right?
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, we will love and care about them. I believe in the mental illness part because unless you have been on the front lines or you have done something that was against your moral values by virtue of Romans 13, I'm going to go back to Romans 13. But going back to that, right? Yeah. Makes you think. And again, it's not for us to judge, you know.
So we should never judge, but how should we answer if someone asks us? If someone with PTSD comes up to you and says, hey, I am tormented by something that I did, that I was forced to do, and I live with it every single day, and every time I close my eyes, this thing goes through my brain every single time.
So go back to what the way Paul said it. What he did, and he had to do it. Yeah, how Paul handled it. So, but it's hard to explain to people who don't have the Christian and don't understand the Bible. So it's kind of hard to do that, you know. Unless you say, hey, let's go to the Bible and show you what these people have done and how they handled it, and God forgives them. You know?
And when I take it from a perspective of people watch your actions, words are one thing, right? Truthfully, how are you living? And if they come to you, and I deal with this every day, and so people will just come to me, I will take them to mental health, behavioral health. I will get them the help, but not just leave them there. I will follow up, and your actions as a Christian may lead and may be
So true.
seen. So if they're Christians, dealing with this all as well, and it is the continual uplifting and praying with them and taking the time and knowing that their challenge is very unique because they know God's position and they know it as well as believers, and so it's different.
You know, sometimes I think you know, differentiating mental health also into different categories is important, right? Like PTSD is not the same as depression, right? The triggers are different. The what created it is different. So, and you know, I just think, and from what I've ever read on PTSD, is that they feel abandoned, right? So often they don't have an outlet to, or somebody that can understand what's going on, and so they feel like they're just out in the dark by themselves. And it doesn't matter, sometimes it doesn't matter what our position as a person is, right? It could be much more important to them to just understand that we would rather listen to them and just be there to help them and not suggest that we know how to solve it. Because I don't know how to solve it. I mean, that's the truth. And to, you know, I don't want to say going to the scriptures is a cop-out, but it would be really hard for me if I was in the darkest spot of my entire life and all I was looking for was a little pinhole of sunlight, and you tell me, like, check out Paul.
No, I didn't mean that. I was telling us how.
Oh, yeah.
No, I was saying, he did, well, he had help too, and I guess,
Yeah, she take that, you know, because he said, oh, I can't go there because they're going to kill me because I killed them.
Yeah, he says himself he was the worst of the worst, right? Like,
he was the best of the worst.
Best of, yeah. That's a dark admission, man. You're like, knowing what the Romans did and what the Jews did to themselves is pretty scary stuff. Well, sorry, not to themselves. To those that were not within their sect, it is very, very scary. And those people were innocent, like completely innocent. And they would do some bad things. You know, hanging them, using them as lamps, if you've never read about that stuff, you need to go read Josephus and read about what the Romans did to Christians. It will give you a different
That is
perspective.
such a
I
big
don't
book.
want to read that.
I have that book I started.
You don't need to read the whole Josephus. Just go find a spot.
I don't want to find that spot.
It'll give you a different perspective.
No, I already know just enough to argue.
All right, so we got like 4 minutes. Let's talk about so we got to the measuring rod, and then we.
No, I'm sorry. We have to do it.
But
The opportunity.
that was really good. That was a really good conversation. So the 3 things that they measure within the first verse is the temple, the altar, and those who worship in it. Right? That's the 3 different things. Talks about I think it's the temple and those that worship in it. So then in number 2 it says, leave out the court which is outside the temple and do not measure it, for it has been given to the nations, and they will tread underfoot the holy city for 42 months. So anybody understand what 42 months is? You guys ever heard about that?
A year and.
40,
It's 3.5 years.
3.5 years. Right? So 3.5 is half of what? 7. So it's something, right? 7 is perfection or complete.
How many years did Jesus
Wasn't it about 3.5?
3.5. Yep. There's a lot of things. We can get into a whole, that would take an entire year to talk about all the various things that are 3.5 versus 7 within the scriptures. It would be impossible to go over all of it. And then by the end of it, I wouldn't even remember why we started to do it.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, I'm telling you, I almost started to do it while I was studying for this, and I was like, nah, this is the
So
best
once
thing.
again, these people, is he supposed to profess this? They will understand this. What that means, right?
Who the people that the letter's written to?
Yes.
Yes, they'll understand that. Yeah. What is the holy temple? For the people that he's speaking with, like the Jewish people. They know what the holy temple is. They know what the holy temple is. They know what the altar is. They know where the people that are going to be worshiping. And they definitely know what it means to be in the court. Because that's where the non-believers are. Right? The general summary of this, the whole idea of this is, I can't quite figure this out myself, so you guys might even be able to help me. Every single place I studied in verse 11, chapter 11, 1 and 2, it basically summarizes it this way. God will protect, but we must be measured first. That's the summary of verse 1 and 2.